Hi, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have full review of the Motorola Edge 50. Let's start. This device is part of the upper mid-range and honestly offers very good specifications. Little by little I will tell you a little more details because we will also have to see the experience. It's not all about the specs, but first I will tell you about the price. In Mexico, the version with 12 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage has arrived at a price of 9,999 pesos. That is more of $480. Right off the bat, it's already a competitive price considering the specs it has, but currently in the Motorola store is a discount, so you can buy it with 8,999 pesos, plus with the Motobots as a gift. So as you realize, it offers very attractive things, considering that you also get charger included in the box. Among its competitors, there are good options, that has to be said, although there are also other options that could turn out to be very bad compared to this device. So I think it's a serious contender in the range. In its favor, it has the distribution. Since being a Motorola device, we will find it in Motorola stores, both physical and online, and also in telephone companies, and in the case of Mexico, in some stores like Liverpool or Electra. Then it is relatively easy to get it in a physical store and not only online. In the design, we are going to find something completely positive. In fact, it looks like a device even more expensive by the fact of integrating curved screen and having such a stylized design. The bezels will be very reduced, although not as symmetrical due to the curved screen, so the top and bottom bezels look slightly thicker. But overall, as I say, it looks very attractive. On this front, it also comes protected with Gorilla Glass 5, which is not the most advanced that is integrated in this price range. But it is definitely appreciated the fact that we do have here a level of protection for the screen. Obviously, it's not an all-rounder device, so you have to treat it with care, especially because of the screen issue, but it looks very nice. On the sides, we will find aluminum frames that could defend this device well in the face of. There is some accidental drop, although on the sides the frame is very thin. On the right, we find the volume buttons, power button, and curiously, a microphone, a bit strange placement that we will talk about later. On the top, there is another microphone and also the Dolby Atmos label, while on the left side, we will not find any buttons or special port, but it serves to tell you that the thickness is 7.79 millimeters. So it is a device considerably slim, and it's also lightweight. It weighs only 180 grams, and that definitely makes it very comfortable in the hand, plus the back cover is also curved. So the grip is quite comfortable, and the back cover is made of synthetic leather, so it's also going to have an excellent grip. In this case, I have the Peach Fuse Color Edition, but it is also available in Jasper Green and also in Charcoal Gray. In fact, the Gray Color Edition has synthetic suede, which could also be attractive. At the bottom, we will find the tray for the SIM card. In this case, you can only place a SIM card. Then there will be a microphone, the USB-C port, and the speaker with 2 holes. The design of the back cover seems nice to me, very clean, and has a small relief to reach the camera module. So in this case, it is not completely enclosed, but this relief generates a very nice shadows effect of the device. So it is very nice and very comfortable in the hand. And by the way, the box also includes a case that comes with a color according to the device, so the simple fact that you include case is already something positive. But if this case also has a nice design, is even better. And to finish with the positive things, this device integrates IP, so it is water resistant. If you accidentally fall into the water, you will have very high chances of surviving. Remember that this is 1.5 meters deep, but in water. Pure, so just be careful. It is a level for accident protection and not for recreational use, although anyway, if you could put it in a pool or the sea, but at a shallow depth and for a short time. And then rinse it with pure water, then in design, I think it complies in all aspects. Let's talk now about the screen that has a size of 667 inches. It is a screen with an average size. Its resolution is higher than Full HD, to be exact. It is 2712 x 1200 pixels, so it will reach a density of 444 pixels per inch. This means that even text with very small fonts will be distinguished perfectly well. It will be difficult to notice or distinguish the pixels. It offers OLED technology. Motorola calls it P-OLED due to the curvatures that it can have, and in this case it will obviously offer intense colors, very high contrasts. The viewing experience will undoubtedly be of excellent quality. In this case, the manufacturer also has 3 color calibration modes, so that in case you do not like the color so saturated, you can choose something simpler, and also has a manual adjustment of the color temperature of the screen. So you have everything you need to have an experience according to your taste. With respect to brightness, I find the minimum brightness to be sufficiently low and comfortable, although fortunately there is also the option for extra dimming within the center of accessibility, so you can have an even more comfortable experience. And regarding the highest brightness, it is also good enough to comfortably display the device outdoors. Even its maximum peak is 1600 nits, although in this case obviously only when you watch HDR content, so some areas of the screen could raise its brightness up to the height. Definitely that we are also facing a very good display, which also has 120 Hz in its rate of update, which will be automatically adjusting between 60 and 120 to also optimize the battery, so the movements, if you can get to see very fluid, it is a screen that does not disappoint. So it complies perfectly well. In the sound, we will find a positive experience. It has 2 speakers, so it is compatible with stereo sound. One is at the bottom and the other is in the area of the earpiece for calls. Obviously, the main speaker is the one that is on the side of the phone. The bottom one is the one that emits a little more bass frequencies, and in this case, I think the sound is good. Although when you get to the highest volume, you will notice that the mid-frequencies can become more prominent than necessary and begins to result in a not so pleasant sound. Fortunately, it has equalizer thanks to all the Dolby Atmos settings that integrates. In fact, it also brings different types of surround sound presets, different equalization presets, so you can access. It specifically has a 10-band equalizer. So I modified the equalizer to achieve a more pleasant sound, and the good news is that it is possible. The only small drawback is that the volume will not be as high when you reduce these mid-frequencies, but it is still a remarkably good volume. Let's listen to a small test, although remember that it is not the same to listen to it live.
Como muchos otros dispositivos.
Like many other devices in this price range, this device also does not integrate headphone jack. It is an absence to which we are already getting used to a lot to play. I consider that it is always essential a headphone jack to have no latency, but if you're not going to play with headphones, maybe you will not miss it so much. Unfortunately, it has good wireless audio codecs, so it has support for LHDC version 3 and version 4, also aptX, aptX adaptive, and LDAC. So it has everything you need so you can enjoy your music with the highest quality possible if you have a headset. A compatible streaming service. Regarding the microphones, we are going to find 3. One is on the left side and one is on the right side when you are holding the device horizontally. So they are oriented so you can pick up the stereo sound well. The other microphone is on the top, which might come in handy when you're gaming so that it more or less picks up your voice, although it will also be used to try to cancel noise and the like. The truth is that the number of microphones is very good, so let's give it a try.
Esta es una grabación de audio realizada con los micrófonos integrados del Motorola Edge 50.
Obviously the voice is going to be picked up well, and it strikes me that in this case it seems that Motorola has disabled the noise cancellation that we saw on other Edge series models. Possibly they received an update across the family, which is positive because now I think the audio is much clearer. But now let's test the microphones in a much noisier environment. The microphones definitely don't adjust their gain correctly, so you'll start to notice a bit of distortion when the sound is too loud. And curiously, if the volume is too loud in the environment and suddenly drops a little, the microphones are not able to adjust either, so you are left with a very hollow experience. The truth is that in this sense, I would not recommend it for recording concerts. And finally, regarding the vibration motor, fortunately it is on the X-axis and is quite premium. You feel small bumps in your hand when you are using it. It is not a simple vibration, and in fact, through the settings, it has different selectors for you to choose how strong you want the vibration to be separately in calls, notifications, and in the interaction of the system. So the experience seems perfect to me in this aspect. The front camera is 32 megapixels with f-aperture and fixed focus, placed in a circular cutout inside the screen, and as you realize, we are going to find a capture that is not exaggeratedly agile. I'm pressing continuously, but it does not manage to make shots so fast. We will find at the top two color selectors, one for a natural setting and one for an automatic setting that will give a little more intensity in the pictures. Notice that at the bottom we find two levels of magnification, and at the bottom right we are going to find the beauty settings, where we are going to find different parameters such as skin tone, big eyes, thin face. Then all of these you can choose to modify your face if you see it necessary. And we also find different filters that we can preview in real time. At the top we can also access the timer, and in the settings we also find the capture methods section, where we can enable gesture or even smile detection or tap anywhere on the camera to be able to activate the shutter in those moments where it is a bit difficult to reach it by hand. By the way, there are two additional things I was forgetting to tell you about. The first one is that by turning the device, you can quickly open the camera. Whether your device is locked, unlocked, or you're in any other app and you quickly want to open the camera, you do the gesture and that's it. This has been around for many generations at Motorola and it's excellent. And the second thing I'll tell you is that although the sensor is 32 megapixels, the photos are 8 megapixels. This because it merges 4 pixels into one to improve lighting. Although if you want, you can have 32 megapixel photos if you adjust it in the settings. I'd recommend leaving it at 8. These selfies will be 8 megapixels as it makes pixel fusion. However, if you have a good level of detail, I think that in that sense complies perfectly. The color does not convince me the 100%. I think there are very pale shades in some scenarios, but overall gives good selfies. In backlit scenarios, note that the preview is slightly optimized, but note that after taking the picture, if it makes a good balance of highlights and shadows, although still there's some overexposed areas. But it is not something exaggeratedly serious, and I think for the price range it complies well with photography with a good amplitude. A good level of detail. Even note that indoors it maintains an excellent level of detail. In this sense it complies perfectly despite being an 8 megapixel photo, and in this case you will also notice a little graininess in the darker areas, but well controlled. At night, if you are in front of a light source, you can see that, again, it maintains a good level of detail. It also maintains the textures in the greasy areas. So, in general, I think it is a camera that performs well. In a backlit night scene, which is extremely tricky, I think it still handles it well, although the color looks much paler. But at least the shadow area doesn't look completely dark, and the highlight area looks a little burnt. But it's still a good camera for the night scene. Believe me, there are other devices that do a worse job, so for its price, I think we can accept it. The night portrait with the front camera, I think, is not as high quality. It notes that it loses quite a bit of detail as opposed to traditional photography, although the blurring, I think, does come through naturally. And in the daytime, he observes that the portraits are a bit strange because the objects try to focus them somehow, but does not leave them 100% focused to the result. It's a bit shaky or strange. Fortunately, already in the daytime, we will find a very good level of detail for faces, but I think it could be improved. For the rear, we will find ultra-wide camera with focal length of 16 mm. The sensor is 13 megapixels, and this camera has aperture f2.2 with autofocus. Good surprise. Then we find the main camera of 24 millimeters with 50 megapixels, aperture f1.8, autofocus and optical stabilization. And finally, a 67mm telephoto camera that is optical zoom approximately 3x, although in this case the sensor is simple 10 megapixels and the camera has f1.8 aperture with autofocus and optical stabilization. I like the incorporation of 3 functional cameras, in fact, as the ultra-wide camera also has macro capabilities. In this case, we are looking at something excellent for the range in which it competes. The manufacturer is also using a recent sensor from Sony. It is the Lithia C. It is not a high-end sensor, but being a modern sensor, it should be well used. Although since the sensor of the telephoto camera has a resolution, let's say, not so high, possibly in the zoom at long distance it is going to fall short, but in a moment we will see the results. For now, I want you to see that in this case, we are also going to find a capture that is not exaggeratedly fast or agile. Again, we see the color style selector, and we're going to find the filters as well. The beauty mode on the rear camera disappears, but the button to open Google Lens appears in the lower left corner. If you tap on the screen, you can adjust the focus and also the exposure. But the important thing here is that the Pro mode is also available, where we will be able to regulate the focus, the white balance. Also the shutter speed that can reach up to 32 seconds or the ISO that can be adjusted. It can go all the way up to 3200 plus exposure compensation. And consider that this device does allow us to take photographs in RAW for something much more advanced or professional. And by the way, in our capture speed test, we noticed that it takes almost half a second to react after you press the shutter, so you have to be trying to anticipate the moment you want to take the picture. It can be cumbersome trying to capture the exact moment, and in the case of the burst, even though it's infinite, note that there's quite a bit of space between one photo and another. So you might also miss the exact moment if you wanted to capture something very specific. And with respect to smart capture, remember that Motorola integrates a collaboration with Adobe Scan, so by entering scanner mode, you're getting all of Adobe's technology. I do not like that it does not allow us to use the ultra-wide camera, which would be more comfortable. But note that the capture does it automatically, applies a filter, allows you to adjust the crop, rotate, even adjust a filter or remove any kind of stain, and of course also allows you to add more pages so you can export it as a PDF document and not simply as photographs. So it seems to me a wonderful scanner. An excellent collaboration on the part of Motorola, and also for scanning QR codes. Note that it is enough to open the camera and focus, because the detection is done immediately. You do not need to open Google Lens, which is positive for outdoor photography. The ultra-wide camera has a bit strange colors, maybe it oversaturates the sky, and in this case the vegetation comes out with a slightly altered color. But out of the colors we will find very good amplitude, and in this case it is not seen that the camera has a very good color. The lens has poor quality with too much distortion or too much chromatic aberration. The main camera, I think, has a little more adequate color management and of course maintains a good level of detail in this type of outdoor photography. I think it will also be a camera that stands up well. Then we also find a telephoto camera, although it has a slightly low resolution of 10 megapixels only, so it does not have as much detail, but anyway, I think it will be a good camera. That manages color well, and the simple fact of having a telephoto camera in this price range makes you can consider it as a competitive advantage to have good quality in intermediate zoom photographs. In fact, look at the full range that we would achieve in zoom. First we are looking at the ultraviolet wide camera, then the main camera. Then a crop on the main camera at 2x zoom, and see that it does maintain good quality at this zoom setting. 2x, so I find it very good at short range zoom. Subsequently, we switch to the telephoto camera, and from here, we will be using only digital zoom, although by the fact of being a sensor of only 10 megapixels. The truth is that the quality of the photographs will be very simple in medium range zoom, although if you try to optimize, for example, the letters, since in this case the nature is not so defined, but the letters observe that it is seen that it applies a quite optimization. The maximum zoom it achieves is 34th of a second, but it does not seem to be very aggressive to improve them. And although that at the same time generates a somewhat inconsistent result because nature looks very blurry and suddenly the letters look very well defined. The maximum zoom it reaches is 30x, but believe me, it should reach a maximum of 15x to still maintain a good quality. For backlit photography, note that the preview looks pretty good, and look at the result of the ultra-wide camera. I find it positive. Usually other mid-range ultra-wide cameras. The backlit cameras reveal too much chromatic aberration in this type of backlit environment, and in this case there are only a few areas where you can see this chromatic aberration. But in general, I think the quality of the photograph is very outstanding. With the main camera, we will notice that in this case it seems not to have detected the face, because if you notice more darkness in the shadows area, so it does not seem to have surprising results in backlit scenarios. Although I don't think it's a very good quality camera. It doesn't disappoint at all. In fact, if we zoom in 2x, it does seem to detect a face better. So it seems that in backlit scenarios with faces, you do need to make sure that the face is detected to have a better balance of light and shadow. And finally, switching to the telephoto camera, we realized that it actually loses contrast and also loses dynamic range, so it is not so recommended to take pictures with the telephoto camera if you are in a backlit scenario. For indoor scenarios, note that the ultra-wide camera is the one with low contrast. The main camera improves contrast and improves saturation. So it is more recommended to use it in these indoor lighting environments, and the telephoto camera is going to give us a perspective again with a little less contrast and less color saturation. But I like the quality it gives us in the level of detail. At night, we will find a good quality with the ultra-wide camera. In fact, I was surprised how well it manages the noise. It is a little grainy, but it is not annoying because at least it keeps some of the textures, considering that it is the ultra-wide camera. Also, if you use the night vision mode, you will notice that it improves in the area of greater illumination and also improves a little more the management of the RU in the darkest areas. With the main camera, the result will be very similar, but obviously with a higher level, since it handles noise in a better way, it is a much cleaner photograph, keeping still well the textures and controlling well the illumination of the most illuminated areas. In fact, in this case, there is not so much difference when you use the night vision mode, so you will have a very similar result. With the telephoto camera, note that the result is also nice in terms of lighting management. Although it does not have as much detail in terms of the textures of the darker areas, but the truth is that for the price it delivers well even in this case. If you use the night vision mode, I think it improves the texture of some areas, although a little more noise will also appear in the darker areas, and see how it does. If we take pictures in these scenarios where there is no direct light source, this is with the automatic mode and later with the night vision mode, where curiously enough, lose a bit of contrast with the main camera, we will find a good quality picture, although with a little more lighting than usual, so it doesn't look so natural as a result. With the night vision mode, curiously the color is called gets to distort a little, but note that applying zoom if you use the telephoto camera, even in this dark situation. Something I like because other devices give preference to digital zoom when they are in these scenarios with zoom. And if you use the night vision mode, it improves the sharpness of the photograph, although it does overexpose the darker areas too much, and that generates artifacts that are not going to be pleasant to look at in these scenarios. The photograph doesn't look very natural, but also remember that manually you can adjust the brightness of the photograph. So I adjusted the exposure to make it look a little more natural, although the colors will also look a little more muted, but I think it's much more natural. True to life, unfortunately, it is something you can do with the camera controls. For macro photography, there is good news, because the ultra-wide camera has autofocus. So we can indeed zoom in to a considerably close distance and still maintain a very good level of detail in this type of photography. So even though it doesn't have a macro camera specifically, the ultra-wide camera works as a macro camera, and in this case at a higher resolution than others, competitors. So it's a great result. In scenarios with movement, note that the ultra-wide camera behaves very well just like the main camera, defining moving objects or faces well. In fact, still with 2x zoom we see excellent quality in this regard, and also with the telephoto camera we see this same performance, keeping movements well defined. By the way, I had forgotten to show you the result that gives us the panoramic photography, which is going to work. Well, the photographs and gives us a very good one, but definitely where I will complain is in portrait photography, where the device does a really bad job for the price range. Notice that it is not able to detect objects well, so it blurs them slightly. It doesn't apply as intense a blur as it does in the background, but it doesn't look like a very natural photograph either way. One positive thing is that it lets us take portrait pictures at different focal lengths, but note that at none of them is going to be a good result. In fact, in this case, objects that are at the same distance will still come out of focus even more intensely. So I definitely didn't like portrait photography. You're going to need to take portraits only of people if you want to get a good result, because if there are any objects nearby, the result is going to be rather simple. And even with the telephoto camera, again, you'll notice that we don't see as much contrast. I even tested in the evenings by having the device on a tripod, which would make the result much easier. But it showed exactly the same behavior. It was not able to keep in focus the objects I had close to me. So, I don't recommend this device if you are really into portrait photography. In video recording, it's great that the device supports 4K resolution on all three cameras. That gives you a lot more versatility. In fact, also the front camera supports this resolution, although if you want to record at 60 frames per second, you are much more limited. Note that you can swipe down to access the special menu, and if we activate 60 frames per second, you will notice that the resolution drops to Full HD and that it is also disabled. The ultra-wide camera. Curiously, it has a bug, because it supposedly lets us access the macro camera. But the resolution goes back to 4K at 30 frames per second. So, as I said, at 60 frames per second, you are much more limited because in addition, although the 3x button appears, it is actually digital zoom, we will not be using the telephoto camera. So, only the main camera can record at 60 frames per second and only at... Well, the front camera can also record at 60 frames per second in Full HD at 60 frames per second. By the way, the front camera preview seems to me to paint the lips a bit strangely. This just as a side note, by the way, when recording video, notice that a button will appear to pause and resume our recording. Another button to take pictures while we are recording, and at the top another button to turn on the flashlight. What does not allow us to rotate the front camera while we are recording the video, although it does have a convenient ring to move in the zoom. As I anticipated, something very positive is that you can record in 4K with any of the three cameras. Definitely that gives you a much broader experience or with more versatility, although it is very noticeable the jump between one camera and another and even the difference in color and exposure when making changes. But I think in this one, so we would demand something better. In more expensive devices, we can get to forgive it for being part of the mid-range, so I insist. I like the versatility you can achieve by having the recording with the three lenses without the need to stop and all in, so in this sense, yes, it can stand out as a strong point. Obviously, in an indoor scenario, we are going to notice a little more differences as more noise appears with the ultra-wide camera, although it maintains well the saturation of the colors. With the main camera, it improves the treatment of noise, improves contrast, and maintains colors well. And with the telephoto camera, we are going to notice that again, it loses a little bit of contrast. So you need to have very good lighting if you want to record with good quality using the three cameras. Otherwise, it is advisable to record only with the main camera. In fact, in backlit scenarios, note that with the ultra-wide camera, we will have a little more chromatic aberration. This is something that we did not see in the photograph, but in the video it is much more noticeable, although if the faces are very far away, you will notice that it will not really try to optimize the lighting or anything. Like that, although the face is not completely visible. However, notice how when you zoom in to make the face a little bigger, it will overexpose the highlight area. Something very similar will happen with the main camera, where again it fails to detect the face at all, and so it doesn't make the necessary compensations to light well. Unless the face is closer, and in that case it will overexpose the highlight area again. And finally, with the telephoto camera, you will notice that it does not make any kind of change. It seems that in this case, if it manages to balance lights and shadows well, the highlight area is not overexposed. Although the shadow area looks a little darker than it should, but the result, I think that in general we could say that it is positive. Something very attractive about this cell phone is that it can record with HDR+. In this case, to reproduce it perfectly, you should play the original file on a compatible monitor. You are watching a file that has already been processed to try to adapt it to standard monitors, but believe me, it records very well with this HDR parameter and for a device of this price. It is definitely very remarkable its compatibility with this mode. The only detail is that in this case, if you try to zoom, it will be completely digital zoom and you start to lose the dynamic range. So it is advisable to only record with the main camera without zooming, and in that sense, if you would have attractive results, at night we'll have a very similar behavior to what I'm telling you. That is, the ultra-wide camera has a little noise, but honestly I like how it still handles color. Obviously, for the price range, we cannot get so demanding in terms of handling the illumination of the most intense areas, but notice how even in the darkest areas, if you give it a little time, it gets to adapt well. It does not overexpose the darkest areas. Obviously, with the main camera, we will have a much better lit result with better color, especially in these darker areas. But when you're recording and there's a light source present, if you're going to get to overexpose too much, and in case you use the telephoto camera, you will notice that actually the performance is not going to be very good, especially in darker areas. Where you're going to notice that even the focus starts to struggle too much, it gets lost, and definitely in this case it would be advisable to use digital zoom. However, in this case, observe how it makes the switch to the telephoto camera, and that causes the video to become completely dark. Regarding the stabilization, note that the result is very good if you record with the main camera and you are walking, although if you start to run, the movements could become very abrupt if you have objects nearby. Fortunately, distant objects are stabilized well, but I think it still struggles for scenes with too much action. However, the device also has a horizon lock function in terms of stabilization, which is something we tend to see. And I think it's a little bit of a disappointment in action cameras, so it's not as usual in smartphones, and note that it will stabilize better these movements of too much action, although it's still a slightly jelly effect. But for scenes with a lot of action, it's definitely recommended to use this mode. However, you should know that by using the horizon lock, the resolution drops to full HD. Regarding the handling of the zoom in video recording, I had forgotten to mention that the maximum range is 20x, and I had already told you that suddenly you feel little aggressive jumps in the changes you make between one camera and another, but there are times where it does not really make the change so strong. Curiously depend on whether you had already used the telephoto camera or not in that camera session you have open. So the performance is a bit curious, but zoom, I think it does not disappoint. In fact, the quality of the maximum zoom looks good. The focus will be quite fast. That is a positive point of this device, although in this case you notice that the white balance is altered a little too. But it depends on the lighting you have in the environment you are recording. The truth of the case is that the focus does move quickly and effectively. With respect to the slow motion, you have two options. You can record in full HD at 120 frames per second to give it priority. You can also record in HD at 240 frames per second if you want to give more priority to the slowness of the scene, although you lose a little definition. But in either case, the result seems positive to me. Although recording at 240 frames per second, curiously the color seems to distort. And with respect to the fast camera, you can go from 4x, which is useful for recording movements of people at a later stabilization stage, to the video recording, which in fact could also result as a gelatinous effect, a bit weird, but I think it is useful. However, the fastest it can get is just 32x. Which of course is insufficient if you want to record a spectacular landscape or something like that. Then in this sense, if it falls short. The front camera also supports 4K recording, which is very positive, although the framing is a bit tight, so you need to stretch your arm will come up better framed. Even note that in backlit scenarios does not look so overexposed background, although obviously if you are going to overexpose, but not to a level as drastic as some other devices. So even recording backlit with the front camera I like, you will notice that in this case has good stabilization, so even when walking the device looks good to record vlogs and the like. In indoor scenarios the camera loses a bit of color saturation, but I think still the result is positive enough. Curiously in the preview it seems to put a color too intense in the lips, although later already in the processed video I think the result is positive, and at night knows that we will find greater presence of noise. And I think in this case it's not so attractive, the result, plus the white balance can be changing in a way, very sharp. Consider that it has an option to illuminate the face through the screen, and I think it does improve in terms of image quality. Although if you use lenses, it will be reflected in a very intense way. Then I think it would be advisable to record with this camera in well-lit environments, because otherwise the result does not look so nice. In fact, even the stabilization is noticeable lower quality at night with this front camera. You also have the fast motion mode with the same functionality that we saw in the rear camera, and we are also going to find the basic slow motion mode in case you want to use it in full HD, and the truth is that the result is positive. The device will also integrate a dual recording mode. So you can record with this split screen format. You can also swap the views, and note that in this case if the zoom is enabled. Although obviously it will not use all of the cameras, so if you record with the ultra-wide camera you will have a very limited zoom, and if you start recording with the main camera you will have a zoom up to 3x that at least has greater range. Also the autofocus is enabled, and if you stop and restart the recording you can also switch to a picture-in-picture mode where a floating rectangle appears. You can switch views without stopping the video recording, and by the way you can also reposition this frame floating. In the software section we're going to find Android 14 with Hello UI, which is Motorola's interface, although in aesthetics it doesn't really modify too many things. It looks very similar to pure Android with its own typography, but it does add several functions that I will tell you about in a moment. However, before I talk about that, let me tell you that it integrates 2 years of software updates, 3 years of security patches. In this sense, if we could say that it is a weak point, because increasingly manufacturers better their update policy, and Motorola doesn't seem to put much emphasis on this. But now let me show you some of the things you can do on this device. Like all Android is going to be able to take the color palette of the wallpaper to apply it in the rest of the system. In this case, also adds the themed icon that can paint some icons that exist on your home screen. We will also find a function called Edge Light that will allow us to take advantage of the curved display screen to notify you of some calls or when receiving a message. Then it could also be useful for when you have the device face down. In fact, if you have it in that scenario, it will raise the brightness to the maximum so you can see it more easily. Note that we can also modify the lock screen to select some other styles of clocks. And some even contain a small selection of widgets that can show us the status of the weather and some other parameters of our device, so it has a super good enough level of customization. Although not as high as some other devices, you can also modify the style in which notifications are displayed and of course the shortcuts that remain in the bottom corners to easily open other applications. Note that by default comes the classic style of controls that come at the top, but you can also activate the modern style that will divide in two sections. Sliding from the left, you access the notifications, and sliding from the right, you access all controls. In fact, you could also switch between the page horizontally. Although note, the icons appear without any text label by default, which could complicate. It is a bit difficult to recognize these tools at a glance. However, you can also show those texts if you want to have a little easier understanding of each of these controls. Remember that it also integrates some options like to take screenshots by having 3 fingers on top of it, although you could get to interact with some elements. So I find more useful the swipe gesture, but that option is not available here. A gesture is also available to enable the split screen in a quick way. Just swipe quickly to the center and then return, but it can be a bit confused with the gesture of going backwards, so I insist. Both gestures can be a bit complicated in their activation, and of course not all apps work in split screen, although the most popular ones do, and also note that these apps remain linked in the list of recent apps. Also remember that you can open this little sidebar on the side to open applications in a floating window mode. It can be useful because it also supports YouTube, and in fact you can open the full list of applications also from this bar. And note that you can open more than 2 applications in this format, unlike other devices that come much more limited. In fact, note that I already have 5 applications open in this floating mode, which I think is enough to be able to do a lot of things at the same time. You can resize them. You can place them where you want, and note that the interaction is going to be really very good. Of course, you can also minimize them or close them completely depending on the use you want to give them. The one-handed use mode, note that it only slides down things that are on the top, but what is on the sides is still very difficult to reach. So for example, if you do not reach a letter on the keyboard that is too far away, making this gesture is impossible to reach, although it includes Gboard. So on the keyboard you can also enable a one-sided use mode, but from my point of view it would be much more practical that all this will be enabled with the same gesture. Another outstanding section of Motorola are the gestures. I had already shown you the gesture to open the camera. It also has a quick gesture to turn on the flashlight by shaking the device twice. All this works even if the device is locked. There is also another gesture to give 2 taps on the back of the device to do some action. Note that you could select to open a specific application, play music, take screenshots, or any other action. Another action, so it's very varied, and you can also adjust the sensitivity so it can become very useful. And well, they are also going to add an option called Moto Unplugged that would allow you to unplug for a while from all the digital life, so you can take a break, you will avoid distractions, you will avoid notifications, and even the screen can look completely different. So just set what you want to see in this session, you choose what applications you want that are available, the design of your screen. You can even change the wallpaper, and if you want to also request a password to close this custom session, although for activation you have to give the necessary permissions. Then it can become a bit complex for some users, but after giving permissions and go backwards, you can continue to finally start this session. Note, you can say that the session lasts, for example, 15 min, and that's it. You will not have distractions. You won't have any interruptions, and you're going to be a little bit calmer when you've decided to finish. And you can also finish it manually by checking for your fingerprint, which in this case I don't have it added yet. And finally, in artificial intelligence, Motorola does not yet have such an advanced implementation. So for example, an option will be within the wallpapers. It has the button to create with artificial intelligence. Then you just have to write here what you want. For example, let's write soccer field in a stadium lit up at night full of people, and you can choose the style. I'm going to select a fantastic style, well, better futuristic. But note that you have several styles so you can generate these wallpapers. Obviously, you need an internet connection, and after a few seconds, there's your completely unique wallpaper. So I think it's a considerably good tool, but it's the only thing that Motorola currently has from artificial interest. The rest will depend on Google, such as the implementation of Gemini that you can start testing, a voice assistant that practically allows you to chat with him, generate images, and many other things more. But as I tell you, this is not exclusive to Motorola, but is also available from other Android devices. As for security, note that the device has a fingerprint reader inside the screen. We are talking about an optical reader, so the system will emit light to be able to recognize your fingerprint. Within the customization options, it allows you to change the unlock animation between 3 options, so you can choose your favorite. It has a maximum of 5 registrations, so you can register several people, and of course it also includes facial unlocking, although it is not as secure as fingerprint unlocking, since it is only in 2 dimensions. So the phone itself gives you some warnings. For additional options added by Motorola, you can explore the Moto Secure application, which you can see will give us as an additional option the secure folder, which you can access with a specific pattern to place there not only files but also applications, so it is a way to have a private environment, only as you realize you cannot access by your fingerprint, but it must be with a specific pattern of the secure folder. We will also find the automatic blocking that will allow you to define the trusted places so that when you leave these trusted places, the device will again have a stronger blocking. We will also find an option to lock the network and security settings while your screen is locked so that they cannot disconnect from the internet if someone takes your cell phone. Also, in case you use a pin unlock, you can select an option for the pins to appear on the screen. Messed up every time you go to unlock. And we also find an option of protection against online scammers, which allows you to prevent someone from trying to trick you to steal your password. So obviously it can be useful and you have to activate it. We will also find network protection that will prevent you from unsecured Wi-Fi networks or block access to the internet for some sensitive applications when you connect to open Wi-Fi networks. So it can also be useful for that technology can be used to block, for example, banking and other things. In this section, you will also find described several functions that integrate all Android devices in collaboration with Google. With regard to security, in the description I leave you a link where you can go to see a video where I explain in detail each of these functions. They are available, as I say, on all Android devices. In this case, Motorola does not integrate any type of antivirus, so it depends on Google in that sense, and neither does it integrate a private VPN or other options. But what we will find is ThinkShield, which comes at the hardware level, so this device has more layers of security that would make it much more complicated for crooks to hack into your device. This is a technology that Lenovo developed for its enterprise-level computers, but now it has moved it to these cell phones as well. And note that also within applications added by Motorola is Family Space, which not only will serve to manage all the devices in your family, it even allows you to see the location of your family, and you can link all the family devices so that you can see where everyone is on a map. Here you can create a family or join the family depending on who is going to manage it. But you will also be able to lend your cell phone to some of them, family members. For example, if you have a young child, you can assign him a name. Let's put Isa, and you can give him permission to access only the things you want. You can customize a little bit what his screen will look like, and you can say whether he will need authorization to leave that space or not, as well as a timer. Then note that you can select start. You will have to give the necessary permissions the first time you use it, and that can become a bit complex for some people, but just enter all these sections and then go backwards, and that's it. Note that when you enter this space, you can select how long you want the session of this little one to last, and that's it. He will not be able to do anything until his time is up. He only has permission to access the games you have auto, and that's it. To exit, you will obviously have to verify your fingerprint. It's pretty good, although it doesn't bring some other things like bad posture alerts or light filters that we do see on other devices. Let's move on now to talk about the battery, which has a capacity of 5,000 milliampères. At first glance, it would sound like a standard battery or within the average of what we find in the smartphone market, however. In our test, it actually gave the performance of what gives a 4,000 milliampères battery. That is, it narrowly exceeded 3 hours running a draining application. But it's also a battery life that demands the most out of you. Most devices exceed 4 hours, so the battery is definitely not something remarkable here. As I tell you, consider as if it has a much smaller battery, you're going to need the charger constantly. Plus the background app management isn't that advanced. As running this drainer in the background while watching videos in the foreground, it reached 3 hours with 36 minutes. Again, it couldn't reach 4 hours. So the truth is that I don't think the battery is going to be a good point. On the contrary, it is a negative point. Possibly on a daily basis, you will need to have the power saving mode activated. You would have to adjust the screen to 60 Hz. Use a more or less low brightness and more sacrifices, and fortunately it also integrates the ultra power saving mode that could help you on occasions where you have very little battery left and you need to stay attentive to your calls or something indispensable. So you can turn it on, but as I say, you will probably need the charger near you constantly. Fortunately, the charge is really very fast. In 15 minutes it reached 42% in the test we did. The charger is 68 watts. Although as always it does not use all the power, in this case as you see in the graph. In the initial part it was close to 60 watts. After 10 minutes it started to drop a little, but it maintained a good power to be able to charge very quickly. Then in 30 minutes it arrived up to 73%, and the full charge finished it in 48 minutes. So I tell you, the battery life is short, but it charges very fast and somehow makes up for it. Also consider that it has 15 watts wireless charging. This means that, for example, in your office, you could have a wireless charging base and comfortably, as if you put your cell phone on the table and it will be charging. Then this can also help to keep the battery at a slightly higher level so that you have a good autonomy during the day. In this case, it is not a charge that is fast, but as I say, it is very practical. It is also a very positive point because in this price range, almost no cell phone will have wireless charging. In addition, we will find reversible wireless charging, which is even rarer to see. In this range, this means that you can use something sell as a wireless charging base to place on top of it a headset or a watch or similar accessories, even another cell phone to be able to transfer battery, although obviously it will be a slow charge, so it's a little more focused on accessories, but you can use it, so I think it's a very positive thing. And with respect to battery care, if it has intelligent charging, so if you leave it charging all night, it will turn on your routine to charge slowly, although I do not consider it necessary to leave it charging all night, because with a wire that you connect it when you wake up, I think you'll have enough battery and if you arrive. If you are going to need to have it plugged in at all times to the power, we are not going to have good news because it does not have a charge lock to help protect the battery, or at least not in the useful sense, because it has a mechanism, but it activates in 2 days of continuous current, so please do not leave it plugged in for so long if you want to take care that the battery does not degrade so fast. Now let's talk about connectivity. In this case, it supports 5G networks, which is positive, but not integrated. There is a way to block mobile data access to applications. You can only restrict background usage, but it doesn't help much. Fortunately, eSIM is supported, so if you're traveling, it's easy to add a data plan with a QR code, so you don't have to buy a physical SIM card abroad. We are also going to find support for Wi-Fi E networks, so you have very good download speeds, which is useful, for example, when you're going out fast and wanted to download a new music album, or you wanted to download a movie or a series. If you have an internet provider with good speed, a compatible router, you can have this very fast download. We will also find Bluetooth 5.4, which is the latest in terms of stability and range, and also has NFC, so you can bring the cell phone to a bank terminal and you can make payments directly linking your card to the cell phone. In this case, we do not find FM radio. If we find OTG for accessory connection through the USB-C port and can project your screen wirelessly. In fact, in this case has Motorola Smart Connect, which is a technology that will allow you to even use this device as if it were a computer format, because you can open applications in Windows if you connect a mouse. A keyboard via Bluetooth can interact with these applications in a format of window, so it's quite sophisticated, this screen projection mode. In fact, you could also project just streaming apps to watch your movies and more, or you could also project games and things like that. So it has different categories, and it's a very complete suite of wireless projection, possibly in its price range, it's the most advanced. We will also find Android Auto available, and in terms of sensors, it comes with all the accelerometer, geomagnetic field sensor, orientation sensor, gyroscope, a completely physical proximity sensor. This has to be highlighted because in the price range, there are others that sacrifice it, so it has, as I tell you, everything you need. Let's talk about the Motorola ecosystem. In this case, remember that Motorola is a brand that belongs to Lenovo, so somehow it can also get to interact with Lenovo computers. While there is no Motorola laptop, Lenovo is very popular in the world of computers. So recent computers of this brand also incorporate Smart Connect technology to link to the cell phone quickly, share files, share clipboard and more. In fact, even if you don't have a Lenovo computer, you can install Smart Connect on Windows computers and set up the pairing, and it all works quite well. In fact, you can even use the cell phone camera as a computer camera, and all wirelessly. So the interaction of cell phone with computer is very good. However, in other aspects, the ecosystem falls a little short. For example, if there are Motorola watches, but they do not offer something so advanced, there are also headphones and tablets, but I insist. The interaction falls a little short because in many cases depends only on Google technologies, so we will have the same level. The interaction with other brands' devices then is not so advanced. In fact, Motorola is quite dependent on Google. You're going to notice because when you open the apps, a lot of apps will be from Google for cloud storage, Google Drive for control of the devices in the house, Google Home. So in that sense, it does look very dependent on Google, and it's something that I personally don't like. But it happens with a lot of Android manufacturers. Let's go now to our traditional app opening test. Well, I tell you that it has the Snapdragon 7 Gen 1 as its processor, something that's not that modern. But I think for most people it's going to be powerful enough. In fact, I think it is even more important the RAM memory that goes up to 12 gigabytes, which in theory should allow you a smooth performance, even having several applications open. But that is what we will test next. For now, I'll tell you that it took 2.8 seconds or so to open each app, so it performs snappy enough. It's not the most powerful thing you're going to find in the price range, that should be clear. But I insist that apparently thanks to the 12 gigabytes of RAM it has, this could help it. Note that you already see several applications and we are switching between them without seeing too many reboots. Although we just noticed the first one, but let's see if the same thing happens with the rest of applications. Because if so, then it is not so optimized to really take advantage of those 12 gigabytes of RAM. I honestly believe that with 12 gigabytes of RAM, we should not see any reboots, and we already perceive some, although overall the device still has a smooth enough experience. Then I think the RAM memory could be better, but it is still giving us a loose and smooth enough experience. In fact, this device brings an interesting option to improve performance that is called Smart Start of the application. This will allow the device to learn your usage patterns to improve performance as you use the device. So it should give you a much better experience. It will also automatically give you an increase in virtual RAM memory. In this case, it is up to 16 in total, although we have already seen that it is not actually giving us a performance of 16 gigabytes. I don't think it's going to have a lot of RAM supposedly, but the more you use the phone, the smoother it's supposed to get because of all the learning it does from the usage that you get to use it. So for now, I think the performance has been good, although it's not the most attractive thing about this phone. But something of the most attractive will be the storage that reaches up to 512 gigabytes. It's incredible, although you do not have the ability to expand it through microSD cards, but I think it is not necessary. Having so much capacity you can. Is definitely slow for this type of tasks. Motorola does not communicate specifically version of storage is using, but knows that gives us a good speed. In fact, there are other devices that with UFS 4.0 give us a similar speed, although I do not think this device has UFS 4.0, but it gives us very good speeds both read and write. So you should not worry too much about that. But as I always tell you, let's go to a real life test. Let's export this video in 4K. In this case, remember that the device is exporting 1 min in total with clips recorded with the same cell phone and ready. As you realize, it took 1 minute with 14 seconds. It really shows that the processor is not optimized for video editing, at least not with this application. It is definitely slow for these type of tasks. Finally, for games, remember that Motorola adds a specific application where you can explore content or run offline. This can help you not to use so much storage and entertain you a little, although obviously will be simple games. But also here you will be able to manage the heavy games you have installed, and you can even view the moments you have recorded with your gameplays. So it can get to help you have a better gaming experience. You can also access the settings to select how you want the additional toolkit to come up on playing. We're also going to find the color of this toolkit if you want it to appear with a specific color, and also whether or not you want the text labels of the tools to be displayed. We can also adjust the quality of the screen recording. In fact, you can show your front camera to record your gameplays. You can also choose if you want to full HD or HD only, and also whether you want it to go up to 60 frames per second. Plus you can set recording time limits or file size limits, and you can also show or hide the taps you make on the screen. You can also select how the applications you run while playing are opened and block interruptions such as notifications or calls if necessary. But you can also allow a call to be interrupted if you are spoken to twice, or add exceptions for contacts that can interrupt you. You can also block gestures and motor actions to avoid any unwanted activation, and you can block the automatic brightness to maintain a good display even if you cover the brightness sensor, and you have audio enhancements and voice enhancements. So let's see what all these tools look like when you run a piece of content. Notice that we'll find the little floating Motorola button, and in this case you can select a profile. Performance for your games if you want maximum power or if you prefer to save battery. In fact, here you can see the consumption of the CPU and GPU, in addition to the counter of frames per second and also the RAM memory and processor temperature. I wish we could have these monitors in a floating format while we are playing, but in this case you only have access to them in this side panel. We are also going to have volume and brightness controls and the locks that I was telling you to avoid interruptions. In addition, we have an option of acoustic lights that would allow you to have a good experience when playing in silent format. Since, for example, it would allow you through light to see if the sound is coming from the right or left to see where you're being attacked from. We will also find an increase in the sensitivity of the screen and a reduction in the latency of the Wi-Fi optimized for. The game from here, we can also open applications that we want in this floating format to be able to answer, for example, a message without having to leave our game. And note that you can add all these applications to this bar too. Run them without any problem. Finally, we also have here some options to go back to our game manager or also to share some gameplay or some specific moment that you have recorded, and finally to make a new game. Screenshots or recordings of this game. From this part you can edit the panel if you want to remove options or add some others, and finally change the colors of this toolkit. But now let's go to the tests. In Call of Duty gives us the very high quality graphics at a high frame rate by default. But curiously lets us go up to a maximum frame rate, and note that if it is compatible with all these additional effects, so you have very good compatibility when playing this content. In this case, I must tell you that for all these tests we activated turbo mode in the performance profiles of the game, and in this case we must say that the performance in general is good. Although obviously gamers are going to demand much more. Here the low peaks do not come to notice as moments of freezing, but as more prolonged moments where the frames per second drop. Then if there are these fluctuations, especially at the time, but I think this is not really as serious as it is the temperature that rose up to 45.9 degrees Celsius. So, although it is compatible with all these special effects graphics settings, it is not going to be recommended to activate it because apparently it has few cooling layers or something like that, and that will cause the heating to be very important if you demand the too high graphics settings. In the case of Legends, we changed the automatic setting for a manual setting in medium quality with 60 frames per second according to its price, and in this case the performance was quite good as with most devices. At the beginning it tried to reach a higher rate, so if it managed at times to reach 119 frames per second, but it was quite unstable, so later it stayed at 60 frames per second with total stability. Although when recording the screen, if you get to 119 frames per second, it was quite unstable, so later it stayed at 60 frames per second with total stability. Although when recording the screen, if you get to 119 frames per second, we could perceive some low peaks, so I think that the most demanding gamers are not going to have a totally satisfactory experience when recording gameplays. And again, the heating was a little higher than we would have liked. In the case of SpongeBob, we selected a configuration with high resolution and high quality at 60 frames per second. Although here it should be noted that the advanced smoothing option that does appear with other devices does not appear. While we monitor the game without recording the screen, we had a good performance. It has a few low peaks, but they are not too serious. Here the drawback is that recording the screen, if we perceive a little more instability in the frames per second, and again the heating was a little higher than we would have liked. Finally, in Henshin Impact, we noticed that this device by default gives the graphics quality low. For the test, we turned it up to a medium level, and in this case, we turned the visual effects down to a medium level. We also lowered the scene details to a medium level, but it went up to 60 frames per second. However, we lowered the motion blur to a low level. And in this case, considering that we adjusted several things to put a test according to the price range, I think it is clear that this processor is not one of the best. In fact, it was presented in 2022. And its manufacturer is Samsung and not TSMC. If you don't know much about the manufacturing processes of processors, you should know that processors made by Samsung are not usually of such high quality in terms of energy management and this kind of thing. So it's very clear here that the processor does have quite a bit of influence in this sense of the gaming experience. So this is a device that I'm not going to recommend too much for those who like to game. As a conclusion, I think it is a very balanced device. It reminds me a lot of what Samsung does because if it comes to have weak points, but I think that for a good number of people, it will be a device that will work very well. They will be satisfied, they will be happy. Obviously, gamers not so much, because the device does not get to have such a remarkable performance in games. But it has good design, resists water, has a good screen, has good sound, even in the cameras. We could say that the experience is generally good, although obviously there are little things there that need to be improved, especially in portrait photography where it is definitely not good. But also in video recording, we will find a good 4K experience with all cameras. Overall, as I say, it performs well. For the moment, this has been all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can indicate it and see you next time.